Welcome to How to Leave a Cult. This is Brooke Walker. This is episode 2. And this episode is brought to you by 100 Years of Bliss, which is my coaching company. So I want to welcome you all here today. Hope you enjoyed the intro. Today is going to be about how everything started. So this is going to be really when we joined the cult and the things that began to change in my life once we got there. And I'm going to kind of show you the differences, but I'm also going to tell you how that kind of created an impression that began to, I would say, train me and my family members into where we got to. Because I think that there's this idea a lot of the time that when somebody's in a cult, how could they do this? How could this happen? There's a lot of questions about how did it ever get that way? So you get to hear from the beginning how this started and then what happened from there. And these are obviously all things that, a lot of them are my personal experience. A few things are going to be what I was told after the fact by somebody that I care about, if it was not my perspective. And at the end, I'm going to give you guys one of the tools that I use and one of the tools that I teach. Like I've said, this is about helping people to heal, so that will be a big part of it as well. So when we first moved, we moved from Maryland to Texas in, I believe it was 1986. So it was during my 8th birthday. So when we were driving, I was actually having my birthday on the road. And we moved into the community that Trina and Stephen Camp had created. Now, Trina and Stephen Camp had created the Church of Immortal Consciousness, which is the church that we joined. My parents had known them for quite a long time. They had known them because they used to travel around and they used to do workshops, trainings, and she used to do trances. So in these circles, people could join in their workshops that were based on monogamous relationships. And then they could also go to a trance and listen to the spirit that she tranced. So, and kind of to explain that, she would sit down, get quiet, and then she would allow this spirit to speak through her. His name was Dr. Duran. We'll get more into that later. But just to explain what and how she was trancing. So we moved from Maryland. Maryland was where my grandparents, my dad's parents, lived. My grandfather was a lobbyist, among many other things. And so he lived and worked outside of DC. So we lived there for a couple of years. And when we moved, we drove across all the way from DC to Arizona, to Mesa, Arizona, which is where the community lived. So I was very excited about it as a kid. I remember thinking about moving. And the reason I was excited about it is because I already had friends in Arizona. Now, I had friends in DC too, but I was excited because one of them was a friend that I had grown up with a lot of my life. And so I was super excited to see my friend I hadn't seen in a long time. And I do remember, I loved living in Maryland, but I do remember that my parents didn't seem happy. And I think that was the first time at that age that I began to notice that, because I was 8 years old. And so I thought that this was something that was going to help that. So we drive across, it was, my family. So my mom, my dad, my older sister, Megan, me, and then my little brother, Matthew. So I was 8. My older sister's almost 4 years older than me. So she would have been 11, almost 12. And then my brother is 4.5 years younger than me. So he probably would have been about 4 years old, just to give you dates and timelines and ages of everybody. And my mother was pregnant. with my little sister Dinah. So on the way, and I think that these are important notes of things that I think you guys need to understand, is that at 8 years old, I was having my birthday. Now, my birthdays has always been a big celebration. My mom just always celebrated our birthdays. And I could tell you memories of birthdays that we had before we moved to Maryland when we were in Austin. I could tell you memories of the birthdays that we had when we lived in Maryland. They were always fun. And my mom would do these games and all kinds of stuff. It was a lot of games, and friends would come over. So when we were driving, one of the promises my mom made to me was, when we get there, we're going to have a birthday party for you, since we're going to have your birthday on the road. So I think we were driving through New Mexico on the day of my birthday, which was the day before we got to Arizona. And we stopped so we could go to the mall to get me a gift. And I got one of those like handheld video games, but it's only like a single game, and it just like opens and closes, and it's like the set screen and stuff like that. Loved it. But then we finished driving to Arizona. So I'm a little kid, excited about seeing my friends, and excited about having a birthday with all my friends that I haven't seen forever too. So we get all the way to Arizona, and it was really like exciting. Like, we show up and there was a ton of people waiting for us, people I didn't even know were waiting for us. And so we get there. We were on this block, and this is 7th Street, and we're on this block, and people live in all these houses, like right on the same block, right across the street from each other and next door to each other. Like, the community owned or was renting a ton of the houses right there. So everybody was just really close. And I thought, well, this is really, just as a kid, I don't know that I really thought about it. I just, it was like nice that everybody was so close, and all the friends I was going to have were just right there. So immediately we have a place to stay. So I remember being in a room and putting some of my stuff away. And my grandmother had gotten me this teddy bear, which was just a stuffed teddy bear, but it was like an oversized stuffed teddy bear. So I remember how much I loved that as a birthday gift. My dad's mom got it for me. And then, it was super exciting. I was able to see one of my friends that I hadn't seen since we had lived in Austin, so it'd probably been a couple of years. But she was my best friend. Her name was Allie. And I was so excited about that. And then there was new people that I had met, but I didn't know them all that well. So Trina and Steven had a daughter who was a little bit younger. And then there was another girl named Serena. So these were kind of like my age group. And then my sister had friends. So she had friends. There was kids my brother's age. So it was kind of like this feeling of community, right? This is what pulls people in, you guys. You guys have to understand that, like, when we're talking about these groups, people don't join them because they think that they're going to be selling their soul to something. That happens a little bit down the road. People join them because there's this feeling of community that you get, and it's like, it feels all warm and cozy and cuddly, and you get all this love bombing, and it's like everybody's there for you, and you have this instant support. And here, let us help you get somewhere to stay. And here, we're going to cook dinner together. And here, so you have this open feeling that this community is open arms pulling you in, and that is a great feeling. Don't care what you're from, unless you're from a cult. So immediately, and these are things I've really spent some time reviewing, but also working on, that it was a negative experience that was the beginning, that began to tell a story to me that I've had to work on. So immediately, within a couple weeks, I realized I was never going to have another birthday, or I was never going to have that birthday. And I remember asking my mom multiple times, like, Mom, like, when am I going to have my birthday? When am I going to have my birthday? We never had that birthday. Like that was gone. So that was the first thing that made me feel, and I want you guys to understand, like, having a single incident in your life does not necessarily create a pattern that sticks with you. Having multiple incidences is what creates the pattern that sticks with you, that starts to make you feel a certain way about who you are and what you are, and why it becomes something dysfunctional that happened in your childhood. So if I had missed one birthday in my life, would not even probably think about it. It would have totally gotten away from me, and it wouldn't even really be a memory. But it was what continued to happen after that. So we move into one of the houses. So my dad was an attorney, but he did not have his law license in Arizona. So I think he got a job delivering pizzas, if I remember. And then my mom had been a midwife, and so she was doing that. She had already flown out to deliver some babies for some of the women in the community, but she also had, her and one of the other women there, who was also a midwife, created a business in Arizona doing that as well. On top of that, so we moved into a house with multiple other families. So this is one of the houses that was on the block, surrounded by several houses that were owned. This was in the middle of Mesa. This was fairly large homes. I mean, 2,500 to 3,000 square feet, 4 or 5 bedroom. I think they were that big. I don't know. 4 or 5 bedroom, and so I would say all the couples had a room, and then we moved into a room where we were sharing with, I would say, all the children who lived in the house, who were the kids of everybody. So we're in the master bedroom, which has a bathroom and has two different rooms, kind of like an inner room and an outer room. So like the bigger part of the room had all the girls, because I think there was like 3 of us at the time. So it was me and my sister, and then there was another girl who was the daughter of another couple that lived there. And then the other smaller area was my brother and another boy who lived there who was older than him. So that was a big part of one of the things that happened regularly within our church. It was multiple family living, and there was usually a girl's room and a boy's room, and then the couples had bedrooms most of the time. So now, before that, I had my own bedroom. My sister had her own bedroom. My brother had his own bedroom. And I think we even had an extra bedroom. So to move from this big, spacious house to moving in with all of these different families, that was a big adjustment. So immediately we're in that. And then from there, I don't know how long we lived in that house with a bunch of people. I think my parents ended up buying the house next to us, which was owned by somebody else, I believe. But I think they were financially in the ability to do it, so they did. But again, even when we moved into that home, which was within a year, we did not live without other families living with us. There was always multiple families living with us. And if these houses had a lot of walls, I don't know how else to say this. I'm just trying to paint the picture. If these houses had a lot of walls, they would remodel them so that they were very open, so that there could be a lot of space for them to flow and stuff. But remodeling always took forever. So my parents bought the house next door. We ended up moving into that house. They opened up the living room, and that was a regular space that the adults would all meet. The adults would meet for a couple different reasons. They would meet to have a trance circle, or they would meet to have what they called a process. And this I noticed very early, because the kids were always being babysat, usually by the older siblings. So my sister and the other girls of her age were usually regular babysitters, specifically a lot of the times on weekends. And sometimes it would be 6 hours. And I even remember being very young, and sometimes they would have day or two long processes where they would all sit and hash it out. I can't tell you exactly what happened. I do remember being around smaller circles where they would do this, because it happened after dinner many times, where they would come together and they would start talking. And this wasn't like, hey, let's hang out and have a drink together. This was like they would process about something that needed to go on. So this was facilitated by one of the ministers, which was either Trina and Stephen, or it was their daughter and her husband, which was Marlo and Steve. And when one of the ministers would process them, what that meant was that they would tell them and work through like what their problems or issues were. So a process could be on any number of things. It could be on your relationship. It could be on what they would call your energy, which I think we have a general idea of energy, but they use that mostly as a negative, with a negative connotation to it. Like if your energy was off, somebody would basically tell you that your energy was off and what you needed to do about it. They would process you about your children. If your children acted out, they processed you on that. They would process you on anything and everything. And I think that the idea initially was to work through the negative sides of you so that you could be the best version of yourself type of thing. It was like this self-help ideal, right? The problem with it is that it was done with an enormous amount of alcohol, and it was done by people who were not very kind. And I'm laughing about that because as I think about it, I just understand the ridiculousness. It's not funny, but there was a level of ridiculousness that I look back on now that it blows my mind. And I'm telling you guys stories that I've told people bits and pieces about things, but I've never dove into all this the way that I'm diving into it with you. So they would get together, they would do these processes. The kids would babysit the other children all the way down in age. And in the beginning, I believe a lot of it was based on relationships, anything that was considered out of integrity. So another regular thing that was often said was out of integrity. And basically, out of integrity meant anything that was unbecoming of being spiritual based on what the beliefs of the teaching were. So out of integrity could be, being interested in somebody other than your spouse was oftentimes the one that was mostly used. It could be things regarding other issues as well. So my parents started getting into the processing immediately. I just remember them being gone more. My mom was around because she was raising us and she was pregnant. And then my dad worked a lot because he was working on passing the bar, but also in Arizona, but he was also working a full-time job to bring money in. So after that, a couple of things that began to set the guideline for me. Like I said, the living situation had completely changed. I didn't have a birthday that I was expecting when we got here. It was something my mom had promised me, and then all of a sudden we weren't having it. And then after that, I remember there was an incident. So one of the first things that happened is I got into a fight with Jessica, who was the cult leader's daughter, Trina and Stephen Camp's daughter. Jessica's probably, I think she's a year or two younger than me, just over a year younger than me. And I remember when we got here, I was really excited to see my friend Allie. And I was barely 8 years old. And there had been an incident where I wanted to hold her hand one day, and I didn't want to hold Jessica's hand. I didn't know Jessica that well. I didn't care one way or another. I just didn't want to hold her hand. My parents must have gotten shit for it because I got in a lot of trouble for not wanting to hold her hand. And I know this sounds really trivial, but this is kind of how everything was. Everything was really trivial. So because I wouldn't hold her hand, I ended up getting in trouble. And that was kind of where things began to start. This was something that was brought up in processes for years. I was told by Trina multiple times about the time that I wouldn't hold Jessica's hand. And for whatever reason, instead of that just being an innocent child moment, it began to paint a picture of the ways in which I was like an asshole, you know? So, and then I ended up getting in a fight with Jessica. And Jessica was the baby of her older siblings. Like, she was the baby sister. So she probably got away with a lot as a little kid. And I would say that she probably was being babysat by somebody else a lot of the time. They had nannies who babysat her a lot and took care of her when she was little, especially. So that her parents could be running the church and doing all these processes with everybody who was a member of the church. And they would do bigger processes, but at night, a lot of the time, they would do smaller processes with specific couples, you know, and counsel them in the way they saw fit. So me and Jessica end up getting into another fight. And I remember going home because I was in trouble. And my mom is correcting me. And she's saying, you can't do that. You can't fight with her like that. And I remember saying to my mom, I hate her, which is a pretty normal 8-year-old kid thing to say, especially since I was getting in trouble from adults for getting into a fight. And my mom corrected me and basically told me that that was not okay, that she was my sister now. So I couldn't hate her and that I had to get along with her. And that was the first time that I felt like my mom was not on my side. And that was the first time that I began to feel like I couldn't necessarily go to my mom or trust my mom in the same way. And I know that sounds really funny from an 8-year-old, but when you begin to see the inconsistencies because you're in a new environment, that your parents begin to change in a certain way, that was the first time. Like, that was the first memory of that. And it went from there. The baseline began to get built in that moment on the things that I was expected of and not expected of. Another thing that started off within pretty quick of moving here was my older sister was in trouble a lot. So my older sister was 12. I would say she had a lot harder time when we first moved. And partially because she did leave a lot behind. And I think that for her, it was much more obvious what we left from. She was really close with my grandparents. And I mean, we went from having this kind of our version of a normal type of life to living what they called collectively, because we all lived with multiple families in a house. And then it was, sharing bedrooms with everybody. I don't think I had my own bedroom other than a handful of times after that age. And then it went into having to have a responsibility too. So not only were we responsible for everybody else, but we were also responsible for all the younger kids, and then we had chores and all types of things that we had to do as well. So my sister had to start babysitting. I wasn't old enough yet, but then we would also have to clean. And I remember that and I don't know if I was just with my sister. This isn't like a particularly negative memory. It was just, maybe my sister was watching me. So I was with her and they had to clean the floors of the camp's home. Now they have this massive house with these beautiful wood floors and we had to clean them all. So Summer was showing us how to clean them. And what we had to do was we had to get on all of our hands and knees because it was considered more godly to clean the floors on your hands and knees. So we're on our hands and knees. And I think I just had a towel and I was drying as they were washing. But I was just, because they were wood floors, so we couldn't let them air dry because it would ruin the wood. Like, this is like the kind of stuff that began to happen. So I'm on my floors, on the floors, on my hands and knees, drying behind my sister because this is what I was told to do. And Megan fought a lot on the things that she was told immediately when we moved here. So what happened is she got in trouble a lot. And since I've talked to my parents since then about some of these issues, my parents ended up getting into a very heavy process immediately after we got here. And I believe Steve Wrench ripped them to shreds about whatever. I don't even know what this specific issue was. And ripping to shreds basically means yelling at somebody and correcting them in a very heavy way. And so he ripped them to shreds, and my mom and dad just started, that had to roll downhill, because if your kids weren't in line, it was a direct reflection of you. That's a cult tactic, by the way. Your kids do not have to be a reflection of you. There's a lot of churches that do this. I think if you learn anything from today's talk, it's that you don't, like, children do act stuff out, right? But a kid doing so anything that we did was considered a reflection on my parents' bad parenting. So if my sister had an attitude, it had nothing to do with the fact that she was a fucking 12-year-old kid. It was because my parents hadn't taught her well enough how to behave, and that she needed to serve so that she would get closer to God, so that she would know how to behave. And I was littler, so I just watched my sister and the things that I saw my sister do. And so when my sister got in trouble, I just was like, okay, nope, I'm going to make sure I don't do that. Because if I do that, then I might get in trouble the way she got in trouble. And I don't want to get spanked or spanked, probably mostly. There was a few times my dad would get out the belt. But it's the way parenting was back then, to some degree, not to give it excuses. But it was scary. And the yelling was scary to me. Yelling is actually very traumatic for children. If you have children, you really should learn not to yell. It was something I taught myself later after my kids were older, but it is definitely something, like, you should not yell at children. They don't understand it, and they can't differ it from a healthy behavior or not. So when you do it, then they assume that that's what they should do, so that then they learn how to yell. So you're teaching your kids that negative habit. And then later, when your kid has an outburst or a behavior you don't like, I mean, they learn it directly from you. So pretty much that was how it started. So it was everything from having to do chores. And my parents, my dad passed the bar, and my parents were just gone after that. Like, I don't remember my parents doing things with us as a family anymore, because us as a family unit was not important. What was important was the group. So that got taken away. And they also began to financially merge everything. And we'll talk about this much more too, but so another thing that happened somewhere around that time too, I was very little, and I remember asking my dad for a couple dollars to go to the corner store, because me and all of us kids would go to the corner store regularly and buy candy or sodas or whatever it was that we got. And I was told I was no longer allowed to ask my parents for money. That if I needed money, that I had to go to Stephen Camp for money, because we did money with them. So I think I was still, I think this was still the first year of moving there. And I end up having to go ask Stephen for money to go to the corner store. And it was such a fucking setup. Like, it was the most unkind thing to do to a very small child. So I asked Stephen for money, and he says something snarky to me. And I will tell you, from that day to forever, for the entire time that I was involved and in this cult, which was almost 30 years of my life, I never fucking liked him. We'll talk about me being forced to hug him down the road. It's another shitty thing that happened. But so I was told, for me to be able to get money, I had to go to Stephen Camp. So I remember going to Stephen Camp and asking for money, and maybe he gave me a couple dollars or whatever it was he gave me. And then, because we were all trained to do things the way our parents were trained to do things, Jessica wanted to express to me how mad she was at me for asking her dad for money instead of mine. So now there's this circular level of just bullshit. It was, I'm sent to go talk. I'm not allowed to ask my own dad for money. I have to ask her dad for money. So I go ask her dad for money, and then she's mad at me. And it's all because they created this cycle. And this was one of the many, this kind of shit happened all the fucking time. So that's kind of how it started. So we're going to get into more stories that are similar to this. We're going to go into next things, but I want to kind of set the baseline for where we started and some of the things that began to happen that began to groom all of us into behaving a certain way. And I would say my parents as well. Not that they're not culpable and responsible, they're adults. And I have very good relationships with all my family members now, but it's taken a very long time and a lot of hard work to get there. 100% worth it. So I hope you guys understand, like, 100% worth it. I adore my family and I adore my parents, but we've been through a lot. So thank you for joining us for episode 2. So I want to give you guys something you can use if you are trying to calm down, if you're stressed, or if you've been in something. This is something that'll help to reset you. So I'm going to give you guys a breathing technique. This is really what I teach a lot of people. It's a breathing technique. I like it because you can do it at any time, and if you're stressed, it will help to calm you. So it's a type of diaphragmatic breathing. So your diaphragm is right, below your ribs. And when you activate breathing, that's a deep breath down into below your belly button. You want to think of breathing so that you expand that area below your belly button. When you do that, it activates your diaphragm, and when your diaphragm gets activated, it tells you that you're calm. It begins to reset yourself so that it knows you're in a calmer state. So if you find yourself as you listen to this, because maybe you have been in a cult or you've been in a really abusive religious environment, if you find that this triggers things for you, I want you guys to go back to this breathing technique. And what you're going to do is you're going to put one hand over your navel, right below your belly button. You're going to put another hand on your heart, and then you're going to practice breathing in and breathing out through your nose, slowly and deeply. And I want you to focus on trying to do 5 to 6 seconds in and 5 to 6 seconds out. So we're going to practice it for a moment, just for about a minute right now. Breathe in. Breathe out. 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 Okay. So just notice how you feel after breathing like that. Now that was just a minute, and I recommend doing it for 2 minutes at least. You can do it for longer if you need it, but it helps if you're in a fight or flight state. It helps to pull you out of that and to feel present, and it helps to focus you. So if you ever get upset, or you're having a difficult time, or you're listening to this, or you find yourself being triggered or getting into memories about things, do this. I also recommend doing this a couple times during the day just to reset yourself. If you're having a good day, if you're having a stressful day, it helps to reset you and just slow you down, and it helps you to be present for the people you care most about. So, hope that was helpful. We will have more stories and more tips and tricks as we go. And we are going to have guests too. Most of my family members have actually agreed to be on this podcast, so I'm excited to be able to bring them on as we get deeper into the stories. I want to, in closing, thank you so much for being here. Please join us for the next episode. Please subscribe. Please share this on social media. I would love you to share this with other people, as well as I would love, I really want to grow this. I really want to grow my outreach and my ability to help people. So if you could give me 5 stars. If you want to give me a review, please give me a 5-star review. If you have less than that, please don't review me. And I hope you guys have enjoyed it. I would love your feedback. Make sure you follow me on social media. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.